Alright, hello again to anyone watching these Kaijudo videos. Today, this is, I guess, the wrap-up discussion for the second Kaijudo Open that I hosted through the Rangers Dojo. So, at this point, all the matches that I had from the event are up. So I guess first things first, congrats to my brother Gareth for taking everything down with Mono Nature. So, I mean, went on a sick run, just beat everyone pretty casually, but yeah, I guess the next thing to mention too is unfortunately Stents had to drop out of the event, so big thanks to him for coming on early on. Helped out with the commentary. I think did 2 or 3 matches with me, which was a big pleasure to have him on. He was great as a guest to commentate matches, so big thanks to him for that. But yeah, unfortunately, after he played his first couple rounds, which are still up on the channel, he had to basically got swamped with stuff and wasn't able to carry on and complete the tournament. So basically, I ended up deciding to just remove his match results, the 2 matches that he played against myself and Andros. I decided to just remove those results from the event and just pretend it was like a 5-man round robin event from the beginning. Because I think like the standings, if I had just basically given everyone else a free win against Stents, it would have given the exact same overall standings. It would have just made the records look a bit goofy. You'd have like everyone else's records would basically just be inflated. Andros's record would look a bit worse, and then you have basically a bunch of people at the bottom with a 1-4 record, and it just makes things look a little goofy. So this way is a lot cleaner, where you just have the even staircase, which ended up playing out perfectly, where you have basically everyone just lost to everyone above them, and then everyone beat everyone below them. So kind of cool how that played out, at least. So I guess just running down quickly, Gareth, of course, like I mentioned, 4-0, beat everyone pretty easily. I mean, well, actually not even the case. Like he played, I think 3 of those 4 matches were best of or went to 3 games, and they were all pretty close, except for the match he played against me, where he just kind of stomped me down really, really convincingly, pretty quickly as well. Then, of course, I went 3-1 in second place with the Light Nature ramp. Had a bunch of... I think I had a couple like 2-0 victories. I beat... well, I guess the Stents one didn't end up counting. But yeah, I beat Darksider 2-0, beat Louie 2-0. But I had a close match against Andros, and then got pretty heavily wrecked by Gareth. Then Louie went 3rd place with Fire Dark Nature Light. Of course, lost pretty convincingly, I would say to myself. Played a pretty tight match against Gareth. I guess, well, game 1 was pretty interesting. I felt like it was in Gareth's control most of the time, but Louie had some good chances, depending on how things played out. He had some pretty good shields game 1, but Gareth ended up taking it pretty convincingly, I think, game 1. And then game 2 was a blowout for Louie, and then game 3 ended up being a pretty easy beatdown game for Gareth. And overall, it looked pretty convincing for Mono Nature. And then his other matches, I mean, the one against Darksider we don't have, but from what I know, that's a 2-0 win for Louie, where Darksider just, from what he said, kind of got a little bit unlucky one game with some shield triggers that was kind of a close game, and then the other game kind of just got rolled by a really impressive ramp control draw from Louie's deck. And then against Andros, we saw that match on the channel too. A pretty close match. Like Andros gave him the beating with laws in the second game after losing a really tight first game, and then yeah, ended up going to Louie overall, where he just kind of, game 3 ended up being kind of interesting, where he just had a bunch of Lyras in the games he won, and just kind of beat Andros down, took the aggro role. And then, unfortunately for Andros, finishes 1-3, goes... he took his win against Darksider, which was a close, interesting, kind of funny match that is up on the channel. And then, of course, played a really close match against myself. Even played a 3-game set against Gareth. I mean, I think all of Andros's matches, I'm pretty sure went to 3 games, I think. Yeah, because like he played the 3-game set against Louie, where basically he always had like one game where he looked pretty convincingly strong. Like he beat me down with Keeper Laws in one game. He beat Louie down with Keeper Laws in one game. He beat Darksider down with Keeper Laws. Well, actually, no, whatever. So he beat everyone down with Keeper Laws at some point. And then usually he would kind of lose the other 2 games to some unfortunate circumstances, I guess. Had a really tight game 3, though. I think Andros could have pretty easily... he had a choice that potentially... Like, we'll never know what my last shield was, but in one of the games against me, I think he mesmerized the wrong card in game 3. And if he had taken my Tendril Grasp, there were a number of lines that could have played out. Again, we'll never know my last shield, and I forget the exact order of the cards that I drew after that followed that up, but he had decent chances if he had mez the Tendril Grasp to actually win that third game and actually beat me in that matchup. But unfortunately, I think he made the wrong call on the mez, and I ended up kind of taking control of that game and winning it pretty convincingly. But so yeah, he had definitely some really close matches. I think some of the harder matches to pilot as well. Ended up playing like a 3-game set against Garrus, where I think Garrus got a little bit unlucky game 1 and Andros had a good win against him, but then after that Garrus kind of just had some much more powerful draws in games 2 and 3 and won a little more easily. And then so Andros played a lot of close game 3 matches. And then of course Dark Center, unfortunately, going 0-4. Yeah, like I said, like against me, it didn't look too close. Like game 2 was only kind of looked close and came down to a shield trigger from my end because I think I played it really poorly. Other than that, it should have been a pretty solid 2-0 win for me if I played my deck well, but I ended up making it look closer than it was. Against Louie, from again what we hear, wasn't too close. Against Andros, that match was like game 1 was kind of weird, and Dark Center I think kind of stole that one, but then game 2 he kind of just drew bad, and then game 3 also just some unfortunate situations, but I think that was more of an honest game that kind of just Andros came out on the right side of. But yeah, just I don't think things went super well for Dark Center in some of the spots, like especially against Garrus. He lost that first match to Garrus, where I think a little bit of poor luck, I think. Because yeah, I guess I can talk a little bit more about the decks and some of the stuff going into things a little bit more. Just break down the decks. I had the chance to talk to most of the players over the course of the event. Like some of them, like Andros in the Louie, at the end of the match he played against Louie that I have up on the channel, me and him talked a fair bit about the deck that he brought. So if you want some good thoughts there from him, then you can take a listen there. And then also talked a fair bit with Stents on his list here through some of the matches that we commentated together on his deck. So there were some opportunities. I also reached out to Dark Center and Louie as well, and even talked to my brother Gareth as well about the Mono Nature. So I have some thoughts from all the players regarding their lists and how they felt about them after the fact, and kind of break that down. So the Water Dark Nature control, again, Stents unfortunately wasn't able to finish out the event with it, but I think still interesting deck for sure. Like there's a number of cards that I probably would cut, like the Cordia and the World Waker. I'm not super big fan of. I think Gaia Dragon's a little medium. The Agrix isn't at its best here. Like I would change up a bunch, but I think like overall, if you want to go with like a Water Dark Nature control deck, I think there's like some good stuff here. Like I think just being good spells, good ramp creatures. I think even though I think Kurgar is obviously like a suboptimal win condition, I think you could build like a cool deck with it still if you want to. If you're just going to accept the fact that like you're going to be playing like a lower tier deck when you're playing this combination, I think you could still make something work. And I think deck is on the right track for that. Like I think like I would definitely go up to 3 Squillis. Like that card is insanely impressive. I would maybe think about some other changes as well for sure. Like, but I think like just ramping up to Absolute Darkness, like that's pretty decent. Having like 3 Squillis, 3 Kurgars your late game to try to take over with, I think that's pretty good. I would just change up some stuff. Like I think the Tipsters don't really do anything. I think those cards aren't very good, for example. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly what I would change, but I think like from what Stents' perspective, I mean, he talked a lot about how this deck was kind of coming from some disjointed places. So I think just kind of revisiting it a bit and giving it more of a focused direction, I think could be kind of good. But overall, I think he went 1-1 in the matches that he played. The match against me, I I guess it was like a 2-0 for me, but game one, he kind of had everything that he needed to win. Like he was able to go second and take the draw, take the extra card, had a good ramp draw, stayed alive with like Kurigar and Ramnoth on the board for multiple turns. He found like his one of Squillis at the last possible second before he was going to basically die. Like he found that card. And then even after that, like he had the Terrapit and Shields to prevent him from like dying if I tried to go for lethal. And then because I didn't try to go for lethal, he even like top decked the Absolute Darkness for game. But I think unfortunately he missed the Absolute Darkness line. So that was a game where his deck kind of gave him everything. He probably could have won that, but again, we won't really know what my last shield was ever, so we can't really say that clearly. But I think that probably would have been a match that would have gone to game 3. Because like game 1, again, like he had all the stuff to win that one, but he wasn't able to kind of close the door, unfortunately. So it was a match that ended up being a pretty clean 2-0 from my perspective, where game 2 went a lot more how I would expect the matchup to go, and I kind of won pretty cleanly. But yeah, that game 1 was maybe a match that should have gone to game 3, and maybe like Stens could have won that one too. Hard to say, but yeah, overall it felt like a match that I was favored, and he ended up losing that one. And then a match against Andros, it was pretty close. We saw the Squillis come in clutch a couple of different times, and then he was able to take that one down. So unfortunately, we didn't get to see how it played out in all the matches, but it looked like a solid starting place for going somewhere with Water Dark Nature Control, I think. And then the next deck to talk about here is Darksigner's Water Fire Nature Regen build. So this list is, I think, something that underperformed. Like again, in my prediction, like I had kind of thought that I had picked like the top half of the decks to be like Darksigner, myself, and Louie, I think is what I had guessed. And I guess it ended up being myself, Louie, and Gareth took the place of Darksigner because Gareth went on a tear with the nature deck, and then Darksigner's aggro deck unfortunately didn't do so well. But kind of like I touched on earlier, like I think it started with him getting kind of unfavorable luck against Gareth in that first match. Like that was the one I thought he was maybe most likely to win. Like my thought was basically like he should beat the aggro deck. I felt like he would probably have good enough chances to beat Stens's Water Dark Nature deck. So I'd kind of like figured those would be like maybe 2-0, and then from there, I was less confident in his matches against like the 3 light kind of mid-rangey controls from myself, Louie, and Andros. So I'd kind of thought maybe he goes 1-2 and then maybe he goes 2-1 in those matchups if he overperforms. So I figured he could be a guy that puts up a positive record and goes like 3-2, maybe 4-1 if he gets a bit lucky. But unfortunately, it didn't really play out that way, where that first match against Gareth, which I thought would be one of his stronger matchups, like things basically went wrong for him, and it kind of played out exactly how I thought, where it's like if he loses the die roll to Gareth, then the matchup gets a bit closer, because the matches where Gareth goes first are going to be closer to like 50-50-ish, whereas when like Darksigner wins the die roll, I think he's a pretty heavy favorite. And then that basically ended up happening where Gareth wins the die roll, goes first, game 1, has a really, really strong hand, and wins pretty easily. Then game 2, Darksigner goes first, just wins pretty easily. And then game 3, Gareth doesn't have as strong of a hand, so it's still actually a pretty close game. And then it basically came down to Gareth like going for game just with like a triple breaking, like basically fast attacking Boulder Fist. And if Darksigner had, I think, like any Shield Blast, he probably would have won, or he was very likely to win that game. So ended up just being a case where I think like he got unlucky losing the die roll, kind of underperformed on his kind of blast luck or variance, I guess. The number of blasts he had in that match was just, he definitely underperformed on, I think. And then because of that, he ended up losing like a pretty close 3-game set. So I think getting a little unlucky in that match, ended up losing in 3 games to Gareth. And then from there, I think he kind of underperformed my expectations against the light decks, where he just ended up losing that close match to Andros, and then losing to me and Louie pretty convincingly. So where I thought he would be able to go 1-2, maybe go 2-1 with some good luck, he ended up going 0-3, and then on top of that, losing again to Gareth, which I thought was maybe his best matchup, in unlucky fashion. He ended up underperforming my expectations and went 0-4, which I think leaves a lot of room to think about the deck, I guess. Like I think I still think it's a good build. Maybe the things to revisit are like the shield blast count, just because I don't know how much equity you're really getting out of like the maybe like 7th to 9th shield blast. Like maybe you want the 7th. Like Tendril and Root Trap are good castable cards at certain times. Like Tendril had a number of spots actually when you watch the matches that it looked really good coming out of hand. So I think it's like a card that, I mean, Tendril's really powerful. Root Trap has a place to out certain things as well, but I don't know. I just don't know how much you're getting out of it. And it feels like a lot of deck spaces to dedicate to like just some really clunky cards. But yeah, that's something to look at. Another thing to look at too is like this number of fire cards that you play, like the Blitz Commandos and Steam Tanks. For me personally, I've liked playing more copies. I think Darkseid agreed. Like he definitely wants at least the 5th. Just because it's so crucial that you see one. And on top of that, it's also really nice to see multiples, especially if you're going to be playing in a world with Vang. We saw it also come up kind of in that match against Andros where he needed to have multiple fire guys, and one of them got like sniped by a Mesmerize at an awkward time, and then that kind of came back to bite Darksigner. So I think just drawing multiple fire guys is really nice. Drawing one of each is nice too, just because like having access to either of them, it just makes your Swift regenerations more powerful when you can have the choice, because there's some spots where Steam Tank is really crucial and necessary. There's other spots where Blitz Commando is really crucial and necessary. On top of that, having 6 or especially like makes it more likely that you can actually cast them, which is nice to have in some spots. Like Blitz Commando just being like a fast attack from hand that you can cast when you don't have the regen. Like you can just go like Blitz plus Seneschal or Blitz plus like 2/2 drops from hand after you've drawn a bunch with Finbar. Like that can happen a decent number of times. So just like being able to actually cast them is pretty nice. And I'd rather play more copies of Blitz and Steam Tank than like other random fire cards, I think. So I don't know. The big concern is like the brickiness of like having like 12 multi-civs. But I've talked a lot in the past as well how I think like this kind of deck, the multi-concerns aren't as much of a liability as maybe they would be in other spots, just because like I think there's some like mitigating factors going for this deck. Like the first, it's a deck with 12 2-drops and plays a lot on even mana costs, so you can afford to like charge multi-civs. You can spend the mana to charge a multi-civ on odd mana turns, right? Like turn 1, you can obviously charge a multi pretty easily, and then turn 3 as well, you can just go 2-drop plus play a multi, because this deck just doesn't really have too many 3-drops, and so I think that comes up a decent amount. Like on top of that, Bad Apple is a card you don't really want to charge, and even if you draw multiples, like you usually want to hold them. So like it's a card you're holding on to and casting, because like if your multi-civs are cards that you're always casting, then they're less bricky just because like you'll just charge everything else to cast them. So I don't know, it's just when your multi-civs are bad cards, it definitely hurts more, which is kind of the case with the fire guys. But the thing about the fire guys too is like when you play more of them, then the other one, when you draw multiples, the like second copy becomes live in a sense. So like having more fire guys kind of almost unbricks the multi-civ, because like your second fire guy isn't like a multi-civ that you have to charge anymore, which is, I don't know, it's kind of weird, but I think that kind of plays out where like Blitz Commando becomes like just another card you can play early if you draw multiple fire guys. So I think there are some mitigating factors. Like again, like it is definitely a liability, but it's not like having 12 multis sounds, I think, worse than it actually is in practice with this deck, just because of the way it functions. But yeah, overall, I think you definitely want to explore having a little bit more. I think another idea that Darksigner threw out was trying Thought Collective over Logo Scan, just having like kind of like almost a crystal memory effect, just to guarantee like finding that crucial Bad Apple or finding that crucial Finbar or Swift Regen, because like that's kind of what we saw in like the match against Andros, for example. Like in that game, he lost game 2. He just like saw none of his power cards at the right time, or like game 3 even, I think it took a little bit too long to find a Finbar, or I forget exactly how it played out, but it was kind of like that, where he just like didn't really find the power cards when he needed them, and that like Logo Scan just going +1 in advantage is pretty good, but maybe like the Thought Collective. And I think Crystal Memory is probably too slow. But maybe not. Like maybe you could consider Memory, but yeah, I think like just Thought Collective curving into Bad Apple is like kind of what you need. So I think that's like something that's worth exploring for sure. But yeah, I think one of the other things to consider with this deck too is like the whole idea of where you want your ceiling or your floor at, because like I've kind of touched on with the multi-sip thing, like when I build these decks, I've like been pretty greedy with them. Whereas like Darkstarner's build, like he goes like heavy on Shield Blast to kind of like not be so, to actually give him some better defense. He's gone up to like the full 3 Seneschals to give him like a backup plan, give him more like kind of more avenues for just like good curves in the early game. But I don't know, I think like one of the issues we see is like maybe it's just not high enough of a ceiling. Like the floor is raised when you take that approach, but the problem is like you play a lot of close games, but maybe like Seneschal is just like too underwhelming of a plan, or you just don't have the ceiling to break through, I think, against like maybe the decks like mine or Louie's, or even like trying to fight through a deck with like those Vangs like out of Andros's list. Like maybe it's just, maybe on one hand maybe they're just bad matchups, but well, they kind of are. Like it's going to be tough regardless, but I think there's a decent chance like this kind of approach is just a little bit too underpowered, and maybe embracing some of like the more veggie oriented stuff, like the high rolly things like Cornucopia and Ninja Pumpkin. Like I think they are kind of bricky in their own right, and it's not like the shield triggers where they give you like a line of defense for when you do brick. Like the shield triggers, you can like brick on them when you draw too many, but at the same time like you have a bunch in your deck and maybe your shield zone's better, which gives you time. I don't know, it gets kind of weird, but like that's kind of my thought is like this deck raises the floor, but I don't know if it has, like maybe you just need that higher ceiling, because like in general I think there's like an issue that people can have, I think, where they want to play, like when you play a lot of close games you feel like your deck might be better than it is, just because like you feel like these games are really close, you feel like you have a shot, and it's like for example, like you could have a deck with a higher floor where maybe like only 20% of your games are blowouts. Like where I'm just spitballing random stuff here. Like 20% of your games are blowouts, and like you win half of those and you lose half of those. And then you play 80% of your games are going to be these like really close games. You always feel like you have a shot, and maybe you win half of those too. So overall your win rate is like 50%, which is fine or whatever, but you feel like you have a shot in 90% of your games. So you feel really confident, because like I'm sure in those 40% of games where you lose that are close, it might be like, oh, I lost to not having a shield blast, or I lost to my opponent having a shield blast at the right time, or they just got lucky with like they had the right card. So you play a lot of these close games and you feel like you're in it, but overall you're only winning like what is that, like 50% of the time, right? Whereas maybe you have a lower floor but a higher ceiling, and then in those times like you play a bunch of games, and let's say like you play 60% of your games are blowouts, like 60% of your matches are blowouts, and you win 30% and lose 30% of those. And then maybe you play a bunch of close games and you actually win like maybe 25% of those. 25% of your total games, I should say. So basically 40% of your games are close, 60% are blowouts. Overall, you're winning 55% of your games, which is better than the 50%. But the difference is it doesn't feel as good. It doesn't feel like it's better, because only in 70% of those games feel close, right? Because 30% of your games, you feel you're just getting wrecked. You're getting rolled, and it doesn't feel good. So you're only playing close in 70% of your games, which again, like that's going to feel to you like the deck's performing worse than this deck that plays 90% of its games are close. But the reality is, when you play that deck that has the higher floor, you're losing just raw. Well, you have to look at the bottom line with these kinds of things, because like that's the problem, is like you kind of get tied up into these like kind of emotional things and how the games feel. But at some point, you have to look at the bottom line and just say, like, how much is this deck actually winning? And I think that's, like, something you have to kind of do at certain points. And I think, like, I'm just kind of generalizing here, but I think that's something that can happen. And that might be the case with this kind of deck where you just need to accept that there's going to be more games that are outside of your control. But if you just want to win a raw number more of games, you're going to have to embrace the fact that there's going to be a bunch of games you just get smoked in. But there's going to also be a lot more games. There's just going to be more games that you win overall. So, I don't know. Like, that's just kind of my thoughts. Like, it might feel like you win more because you play more close games, but you don't actually win more. And you have to kind of look at the bottom line at some point. So, just like kind of a generalized thought there. That's something to consider with these kinds of things. But regardless, I think overall, I think the deck's pretty solid. Has a lot of room to grow. I think Darksigner as well. Felt like this was a good learning experience for him. So I guess we can move on to the next deck here, which is Andros's Light Dark Midrange. So this is another deck. I think Andros felt like there was a decent amount of room to grow with, which I agree as well. Like I think there were some stuff with the list that I felt like didn't look too good, but like it kind of played out how I thought, which is that it has like a lot of really close matches, and like I said, like every match that Andros played went to 3 games. There were a lot of games where he just had blowouts with Keeper of Laws, but maybe the deck was like too inconsistent at putting together those Keeper of Laws hands, so that it was just hard for him to like win the full 3 games against like those decks like myself and Louie's. It was just hard for him to piece together. But like again, like still, I think it can be hard to pilot because you do have those like situations where you need to kind of maximize the cards that you do have. And like I think, like I said, like that one game 3 against myself, like if Andros made a different mesmerized situation, then maybe we have like a completely different event where myself and Andros are both 2-2 and we're all looking at it like all our decks have some stuff going right or wrong for them. So I think you can kind of take the results with a grain of salt to some extent. And like, I think like I like this kind of approach of just like the low curve. I think some of the changes I would think about are definitely like, I would like the 3rd Lyra. I think just having the full 6, like powerful 6 drops is really good. I think Trox could easily go. I don't think this is necessary. I think Serpents I don't really like in this list at all. I think it's just a clunky kind of bad card. And I think Agrics, it's kind of iffy because at first, like my first impression playing with and against this deck, and it felt kind of bad, but I think you realize there's just a lot of the matchups. Like the match against Louie, it looked really, really impressive because that's where you really want it, is like these like attrition-y value matchups. So maybe I was thinking like you would probably want to play 2 just because the deck doesn't really support it. It's basically just using it as like a card for grindy removal based matchups to give you that top end. And I think maybe 2 is the right number. Maybe you still play 3 because you need it for those matchups, and you just accept that it's kind of bricky in other aggro matchups where your top end is just going to be the 6 drops. So, but I don't know. I think like 2 to 3 could be the right number. At first I was pretty confident it would be 2, but I could see arguments for keeping the full 3. But I definitely think like Serpent is just not really a card I'm interested in for this build. I think... and then, like, I think the whole early game suite is kind of customizable. Like, I think, like, the Screeching, the Gloom Hollows, the Grudge Weavers, even, like, Bone Blades and Storm Sparks, I think that's all kind of up for debate, how you want to approach it. Like, you could easily go for, like, 3 Arbiters, 3... you could incorporate Blinder Beetle Primes pretty easily, like, cut the Grudge Weavers for some Enforcer blockers, cut Lost Patrols for Tar Gushers. Like, you could do some different things to this deck to change it up a bit, and I think, like, a lot of the early game suite is the main thing. Like, the things that I like the most are just, like, the Keeper of Laws, the Spire Puppets, the Mesmerize, the Vang, and Lyras, basically. And then everything else is kind of just pick and choose what you want to add. So, but I think, like, this kind of deck, it's tough to build. I think it's going to play a lot of close games and matches. So, and we kind of saw exactly that, where definitely some of the hardest matches I think to pilot were played by Andros in this tournament. from what we saw from what I saw in the in the all the matches that I covered. But yeah, just overall pretty cool deck. I think an approach I like, but I think it's something that could be tuned up a lot. But overall, again, like the deck, like maybe a few different decisions here and there, and like some matches flip around and some results go positive, I think. But yeah, interesting. The next deck is Louie's Fire Dark Nature Light Control. So of course he finished 2-2, beating of course Andros in a pretty close 33 game set, and then also beating Darksigner, and from what I hear, again, not kind of lopsided match, and then losing to me in a lopsided match where it felt like his deck was kind of exposed for not having the stuff to handle control, or like the controlling mirror matches, like just being a little bit light and just so many, like a lot of removal options that just like, I mean, frankly, he just like had a lot of kind of dead cards against me and not enough card advantage, I think, to really properly support like the controlling game plan. And I think that's also something that Garrus kind of exploited. Like when you watch the match that Garrus played, like game 1, Garrus just kind of sat back, accumulated advantage. I think game 2, Garrus could have also played differently and maybe won as well if Garrus had like taken a similar approach. But I think he took a bad line and kind of got completely blown out for it. And then game 3, yeah, like it felt like maybe Louie's deck didn't have the tools it needed for combating Mono Nature consistently. Like it pretty heavily, like I think from what we saw, he was pretty heavily reliant. Like the only reason game 1 was maybe close in any respect was that Louie had really strong Shield Blast, which is a good thing that his deck has going for it, is it does have like a pretty decent number of Shield Blasts. But even still, like I think there are a little bit of issues, and I think that's one of the things Louie mentioned too post-tournament, is he just didn't feel like the fire was really that good. I think like that's something he mentioned, is just wanting to go back to just Water Dark Nature Light, just for the kind of the better stuff for the control mirror matches and stuff, like with Reverberates and Crystal Memories, like, because I think that's another big deal too, is I think part of it is he lowered his top end to keep the deck leaner. But at the same time, like without Crystal Memory in your deck, it just makes it really hard to access these cards at the right time, which is, I think, one of the issues he had trouble against my deck, is just, he was relying on, like, frankly, he was just relying on some good luck in the match against me to, like, draw enough card advantage, like enough Reapinsos to get up in mana, and then basically praying that he could find an Eternal Haven at the right time, because he just didn't have that much access to it, so. But overall, I think like a solid build. It's like kind of anti-aggro in a sense, but so I guess it worked well against Darksigner's deck, but not so well against Garrus. But yeah, I think some issues with it in general. Like I think one of the things as well that I was thinking about with this tournament is thinking about like going first and second. Like I think there's some decks and matchups where like it's definitely right. I think like we saw a few times instances in this event where like there was, I think, players that actively wanted to go second, and I think that's good in some matchups, and sometimes it's just going to be correct no matter what in this game. But at the same time, I think like for some decks, again, this is kind of just like more of a generalization than maybe for Louie's deck specifically, but I think like wanting to go second could maybe in a lot of spots could definitely be more of a bug than a feature of like of your deck in this. And what I mean by that is that like I think there's a decent chance a lot of decks are just being built incorrectly, where the reason they're wanting to go second and take that extra card is more because they're not built to be like functional. Like I think that's kind of an issue. Like I was saying, I think it's more of a bug than a feature, in the sense that like if you feel like you need to go second because it helps your deck that much more, I think it's just maybe a problem with your deck building, where if you built your deck correctly, then you would have enough pieces of card advantage or other things of that nature that you can just like go first and function perfectly fine and like hit your land drops and draw cards and do what you need to do without relying on your opponent doing things. Because I think there's too many decks where they just rely on their opponent giving them cards by breaking shields poorly, or just like just yeah, just giving them extra advantage for no reason, or relying on your opponent doing like making bad play. I don't know. It's just weird because I feel like there's just this reliance on your opponent to do weird things and then go second, and then you can just for your deck to just function and hit land drops and be able to cast your cards. Like you're just relying on your opponent giving you extra cards to do that, but you're not like building your deck to function properly. Because you want to have like, I think like your deck still, even if you're like a reactive control deck or mid-range deck or whatever, you still need to be able to just like, if your opponent's not doing anything, you need to be able to do some kind of like functional proactive game. Like you should be able to take advantage. If your opponent's not doing anything, you should be able to take advantage of that by just like tapping out and playing Reap and Sows or Verdant Helixes or whatever. Like you should be capitalizing on that and like have like some strong proactive game built into your deck where you can do something without relying, because if your opponent doesn't attack you and give you 2 extra cards out of your shields early on by just poking aimlessly, then all of a sudden you're just draw passing. And so I think, yeah, you're just like not really doing anything functional. You're just like sitting and top decking and putting bad cards in your mana zone and then just like holding on to like one other bad card. Like, I don't know. I think that happens a lot where people are just like, again, like wanting to go second, I think can be like more of a bug than it is a feature. And I think like you kind of need to evaluate, because I think there, again, like with some of these matchups, like I think it is just like strategically right to go second regardless. But I think a lot of other times it is like an indication that there are some flaws in your deck building. So again, just more of a generalization of something that I've kind of observed, but maybe not like specifically in reference to Louie's deck here. But yeah, just some thoughts I've had. But yeah, so overall, I think Louie, like I said, mentioned wanting to kind of revert back away from the fire stuff. Like, I think Owl and the removal, like it's good against like aggressive stuff, but I don't know. I think you can do well with like the water package instead. But or just, I think like Fire Dark Nature Light is viable for sure, but I think you have to maybe make some changes in the deck building. Like I think there might be a little bit too much like removal-y Shield Blast stuff. I'm not really sure. Like I think there's definitely viable builds. I think this deck, like most of the decks in the tournament, need a little bit of tuning, but I also think like Water Dark Nature Light is maybe something preferable, especially like obviously I think like basically I just think Water Dark Nature Light is better if you expect like, I think dragons probably, and as well as just like control-y mirror matches. I think water is much better. But if you want to be playing against like more aggro-y rush stuff, then I think Fire Dark Nature Light has more merit. But anyways, yeah, we can move on to the next deck here, which is my own Light Nature ramp deck. So I guess like the build, I think I was like fine with. I don't know. It was decent for me. Like I think some of the matches I got kind of lucky. Like I think I didn't play that well either. Like yeah, I don't know. Like my match against Stance, like I said, like game 1 I kind of got away with him like kind of making a mistake, and then in a match in a game that he probably could have won by like kind of high rolling, and then game 2 I kind of won pretty clean. So I felt like that match was favored just on the decks, and it kind of played out that way at the end. Like against Darksigner, I think my deck was just favored and played well against him, and then Andros. This matchup was maybe too close. Like I think game 2 I played poorly. I think game 1 I also made a bad play but didn't get punished for it, and then game 3 I think he made a mistake, and that kind of cost him potentially. Like again, we won't know really what would have happened, but I think that's a match like I could have easily finished 2-2 in this tournament. Maybe even lost to Stance. I mean, Stance didn't end up counting, I guess, for anything, but I could have lost to him too. And then Louie was maybe the most convincing win for me because he just like didn't really end up drawing well. Didn't end up getting like again going into that match, I felt like he needed to get pretty lucky to win, but he didn't end up getting lucky, so it just went pretty smoothly for me. But yeah, overall with the list, I don't know. Like I think things were fine. I was kind of upset. Like I think like maybe having a couple keeper laws would have been really nice for this tournament, of course. Maybe not though. Like I don't really know. I think like going up to 43, I liked having like the one of Mana Storm, but I think I could easily cut it back. Just get rid of like maybe an Energize, maybe. I don't know if I need like the full 6 of these. Like I could see keeping the one like Mana Storm and just because I like the card advantage. Cut them. I think this deck is like still too weak to Keeper of Laws though. Like I think I probably need to revert back to like the Blinder Beetle Prime package or something along those lines. I'm not really sure. I like going to Root Traps over Artichokes. I think that played out well. I don't know. I felt like maybe it was like too much triggers. Like I think maybe going down like an Arbiter or Storm. Like I don't know. Like part of it was like the reason I went to 43 cards is I really just wasn't sure what I wanted to do with the list and like which Shield Blasts were better. And I'm still not really confident at all. So honestly, I can't really even say. I think maybe like cut and Energize would be nice. Maybe cut like down one Storm Spark, maybe down one Root Trap or something like that. Maybe cut one Lyra. I think maybe Lyra's not so necessary. But it is really good for certain matchups. I don't know. I could see like that. Like cut one Lyra, cut... Yeah, it's hard to say exactly. Like I think overall the deck played out fine. I think I piloted it pretty poorly though. Like, I don't know. For a deck that's like really straightforward, all you have to do is play your ramp cards and then play your big things and usually just win. The only time you really have to make any decisions is like how to attack your opponent. And I think like, but yeah, I think every round I messed up in that area, which is kind of embarrassing because it's like the only decision you really have to make is like, I don't know, like exactly. Like it's like when and how you choose to attack your opponent, if at all, or whatever. And like every round, like I think against Andros game 1, I think I shouldn't have gone in, but I did, and I didn't get punished, but that easily could have been away. Like I had inevitability in that situation, shouldn't have done it, and then I just ended up not getting punished. So I think that was a mistake, but I ended up just like, yeah, didn't get punished for it. Then I think against Garrus, for some reason, I like forgot what cards did and just like tried to like take an aggressive line to try to close him out, which maybe was right in hindsight. No, I don't even think so. No, it was wrong. Like I think it was just a bad attack. Like I had decent chances to just top deck some stuff. So yeah, I think that was bad against Garrus. I made a bad decision to attack. Against Darksigner game 2, I made like a horrible attack, like just so disgustingly bad. Against Louie, even like against Louie, I think one of those games, I think the first game 1, I just completely absentmindedly like swung with an Arbiter instead of a Lyra. Like I just mixed them up, or I forget. Like it was one of those situations where I like poked with an Arbiter and then I looked at my opponent's shield and I was like, wait, why does he still have 4 shields? Like didn't I just double break? And then I don't know, it was like my brain wasn't even on, and basically I just like missed lethal that turn because, and potentially gave Louie an out or something like that. Like basically like every round I think I made like some, in like the only area where I really have to make decisions, in every round I made some like terrible attack decision, which is just like, again, like kind of embarrassing because that's like the only time you have to do anything. So it's like, yeah, just, I don't know. I don't think I played particularly well. The deck performed fine, I think, but I think there's definitely some flaws with it. Like, I think it's too weak to Keeper of Laws. Well, I guess one of the other areas that I could go into is just talking about maybe the other Civ options there are for this deck. Like, for example, I think like Fire Nature Light Haven was a pretty, I don't know if popular is the right word, but it was a deck back in the day that was used somewhat frequently. Like the 40 card ish slim Nature Haven decks that were, again, similar to this, focused on ramp and stuff. And then the fire builds, for example, I mean, the main card there, I guess, was Major Owl alongside some other stuff, like different shield blasts, like Drill Storm, for example, was pretty popular. And then a little bit of different top-end stuff, whether it be Infernus and Absolute Incineration, that kind of thing. So, like, the fire, I guess, would be a good starting point. I think that deck, I'm not the biggest fan of. I guess when it comes to like the shield blast and top end stuff, I feel like, I mean, again, like Awaken is a great card, but I don't think it's really necessary. Like the top end in this deck is already quite strong, and I think for the most part, when you're looking at those shield blasts and top end stuff, you're not really adding anything too unique, in my opinion. A lot of it is just shifting numbers around or just adding a different flavor, but I don't think you need that, and I don't think it's worth adding an extra color for that. So I think it's really like the more unique stuff that you need to look at being as to whether or not it's worth it. And when it comes to a card like Major Owl, for me, I don't know, maybe I'm off on this, but it's just not a card I like too much. I think it might be a little bit overrated. Like, it does its job, and I've mentioned how I think this deck is a little too weak to Keeper of Laws, and maybe Major Owl is a way to address that. That's kind of what it's for, like countering those kind of aggressive tempo decks. But I just think, I don't know, I just don't think it does maybe a good enough job, personally. Like, I think it's a little iffy in its performance, a little underwhelming sometimes, especially as the metagame has moved more towards evolutions and things of that nature. Like, I think, I don't know, I'm just not super impressed with the card. I don't think it's really worth adding a third color for, even if it does, being a good creature-based kind of interactive card, even if it is maybe a step in the right direction. I don't think it's worth adding a full extra color for to this deck. And I think there's enough you can do. Like, you just have enough good options in these two colors that I think you can work to address things within them. Maybe the dark version, I think, would be something I'm a little more interested in, because it would be a little bit more of a large transition, though. I think you would change the deck quite a bit. It wouldn't really be the same kind of archetype. Like, I think the main things you would change is moving away from all this spell-based ramp to a pretty decent degree. I think you would move more towards creature-based stuff, and a lot more, and you'd also trim a lot of the top end, I think, too. Like, I think I would view it more as like a mid-range kind of deck, almost. Still using some of this heavy top end, but compared to a lot of the other control decks or even ramp decks like this, I think it would be a lot more mid-range feeling, where it's like just interactive kind of mid-game creature stuff. I'm thinking stuff like Mesmerize and Puppet and that kind of thing, and then maybe using cards like Johnny Darkseid or something along those lines is more moving away from the spells and just having a kind of gum up the board kind of creature plan that you complement with a lot of top end stuff, and you still want like some card advantage and stuff. I'm sure, like, I would still play Reap and Sow probably, but maybe move away from the kind of turbo ramp like this Energize and all these helixes and stuff like that, and then cut down on the top end, and then just, yeah, it would be a pretty substantial difference. But I think that might be an area I would like to go instead. Like, if you are worried about some of these things, I think, like, if you're just wanting like the kind of turbo ramp top end, I feel like I kind of prefer this two color version to the fire one. But I think darkness might be a better way of addressing things and giving the, like, if you want to add some more tools, I think darkness would do it better, and just like reworking the deck and approaching it from a different way slightly, I think would maybe be a better idea. And I guess the third option was something I was thinking about, with just adding water. And I think that one honestly just doesn't make a ton of sense as an approach. It just feels a little weird to me, because like, I would be picturing myself adding memories and reverberates or things along those lines to help the control matchups or something like that. But I feel like if you're going this direction already, where you just want to go this turbo ramp kind of low to the ground consistent approach to some degrees, whether or not it's actually effective enough at dealing with that, like the aggro stuff, is one question. But I think at least attempting to go that direction is an idea that you want to address those matchups. Again, whether it's good enough is a different question, but it does change the spectrum of matchups. And I think going this way, I feel like, is just an indication that you don't really want to be kind of engaging on that. Like you don't really want to be caring too as much about those control matchups. And I think it feels kind of, not, maybe antithetical is a little bit of a strong word, but it just feels like it's not something you should be adding, is to kind of reverse course, because I think you're just doubling down on whatever the weaknesses you do have against those matchups that you're trying to address by going this direction. I think you just kind of exacerbate those weaknesses by, if you just add like more spells like Crystal Memory and Reverberate and that kind of stuff, and it feels like you're addressing a matchup that you were kind of trying to dismiss. And maybe there's a balance to it, where, you know, like, maybe it is worth it to some extent if you expect a certain field. But I feel like when you're going that direction, it feels like a case where maybe you only make that shift in your deck building if you're kind of stuck on wanting to play this kind of ramp deck. You don't want to switch off your deck, so you want to just tune it up to address a different matchup. But it feels like that's kind of weird. Like, I in my opinion, I'd rather just like change the deck than try to do some kind of weird maneuver like that where it feels like I'm taking the deck to a weird place. I'm not super confident in that, but it just feels like it doesn't serve a really meaningful purpose. Because again, like I feel like when you move this direction, it's a sign that you want to be addressing a certain set of matchups and just teching your deck out pretty significantly, adding a bunch of these cards that just expose the weaknesses you have against what you're trying to address that you kind of want to minimize, just to address matchups that you are probably trying to ignore when you pick this kind of deck, I think is just kind of awkward. And on top of that, if you're not playing against like the top tier or like tippy top tier control decks or things like that, like I think we kind of saw this event where like I felt like I handled Louie's deck, which was a control deck that's not as geared for those matchups. It doesn't have all those like super heavy pile tools, or a deck like Alpha Fives where it wasn't like maybe a kind of top tier control deck. Like against those, my ramp deck was able to handle those pretty effectively, and you don't need like to go to water to do that. So if you're expecting a bunch of like more medium level controls and then a bunch of other random stuff like other mid-range decks and things like that, and maybe not top tier light water X tempos, and I think this is like a pretty solid approach. And I think if you want to add the water stuff, it would be only to address and gear for like super heavy controls, and I don't think that's something you really want to do with this kind of build. So yeah, I don't see a great reason to go water. It just feels like it doesn't add a ton that's necessary. And I think similarly to with fire too, I think there's enough ways to address those matchups within your colors as well. I think you could find routes to maybe improve those matchups if you needed to. Like you could just trim down the shield blast, add more card advantage, add a little bit of other stuff within these colors. I think there's enough options that you don't need to add a full color that would really make some other issues more prevalent. I don't know. I just feel like I think I like the 2-color build, or like a kind of complete rework of a similar-ish vein with these kind of like a Slim Haven control deck that's just focused on light dark nature. I think those would make the most sense. Fire, not a huge fan, but I can see the merit to certain things about it. And water, I feel like, is just an awkward purpose. Like at least fire adds some tools that counter your weaknesses, whereas water, I feel like just kind of doubles down on a lot of what this deck is kind of already doing. And yeah, it just feels like it addresses an area that doesn't make sense to address when you pick this kind of deck in the first place. But yeah, I guess those are just some thoughts on the other options. But I think overall, the 2-color clean build, I mean, again, it performed well in this field, in this event. But I think it might have some issues, like if you're going up against light water fire dragons or other light water kind of X decks, I think it might have a little bit more of a difficult time. And but yeah, overall, I mean, again, it performed well for me. Was kind of happy that I gave it a shot. So I guess we can move on to the next deck. And finally, we get to Garrus Mono Nature deck. So this, of course, I played pretty well for him. I mean, he went 4-0, played a bunch of close matches. I think this deck is just so good because it's like it can beat down and go really aggressive in some games, in some hands, like we saw in some of the matches against like Darksigner and Andros, against Andros and Louie. Like it has like it plays these matchups where like one match it can just kind of sit back, accumulate a ton of advantage, and then just make a huge push. In other games, it can it can just go super aggressive. Like I felt like no one really had answers to hatchery this tournament. Like no one really. Like Darksigner has no outs to it. Like Andros has Bone Blades, I guess, but that like comes down pretty late. Like Louie even doesn't have Bone Blades. Like it's like 5 mana removal that he has to like sprout into to play on turn 4. So like, and against me too, like no removal. So basically like Jarbala hatchery is just ridiculous when no one's prepared to answer it. Like it's basically, the main answer is Mesmerize, obviously. Like you have to like draw it and snipe the hatchery, I guess. But even then, like if you're going second, like that's just too slow, right? It doesn't hit it first. So it felt like there was like hatchery was just going unchallenged a lot of the time in these matches, and like just a really, really powerful card. Like Chief Many Tribes shows why it's like so sick in open format. Like I think, yeah, just does such a good job generating advantage. And Gareth liked the list. He said he didn't really want to change anything. I think the one thing we mentioned that we were talking about was like maybe playing Gigahorn Charger, like a second copy, which is something I was talking about, and I think he was kind of on board. Like just having the second copy, I think it just like when you draw a Broodmother, it's really good, and like Gigahorn's just more Broodmothers basically, and like I think one of the things we were talking about was like maybe cutting like a turnip. Like it's like the least valuable early game card. Like there's some spots where it's like pretty nice to have. But I think like what I was thinking was just like cut one Boulder Fist for a Gigahorn Charger. And then maybe cut like a turnip just for an extra 2-drop so you can have like more good many draws, I think. Like maybe a Manapod Beetle or some other 2-drop. Like I'm still not sure what the best 2-drop to play is. Like I don't know if it's Pineapple or Savage Spawn or something else. Maybe Flutterbug if you're playing with Eye, which we are. Like Pineapple looks pretty decent though. Like it just dies, goes to mana, but 1k can be kind of annoying. Like I kind of like having 2,000, but I don't know. Still not really sure on that one, but I think that's something I was thinking about is like cut Turnip for another 2-drop. Maybe cut, Boulder Fist for Gigahorn. But yeah, I was talking with Gareth as well, and it's like it feels like playing more Shield Blast doesn't really make too much sense. Like I don't think you get too much out of it. Like throwing in 3 Root Traps can kind of like give you play against against Infernus the Awaken, which is just a deck that like completely codes this deck. Like it just, if they land it on an empty board, you lose. But I think like the plan against Infernus is just like to get under it. Like I think it's easy enough to do, and it's like kind of hard with sticky stuff like Rollcore and Anjac. Like it's kind of hard for them to like clear the whole board and land it. Like I don't know, I feel like it's just, I think like trying to rely on like top decking your Root Trap to like kill the Awaken, and then I don't know, it feels like just kind of sketchy. Like I don't know, it just feels like it's not really worth playing the Root Traps for that purpose. And I think it's just Root Trap's just kind of like a clunky card. I don't think there's any other really strong Shield Blast that I want to play. So yeah, I just feel like it's just going with the clean list like this is pretty favorable. Like you can have some tough draws against other aggro decks, I guess, like especially going second. Like you're kind of hoping to go first and have really good draws, I guess, but it kind of depends on certain things. Like I don't know, like I just don't think you get that much mileage out of like just an extra set of Shield Blast, and I feel like everything else in the deck has like such a like a defined purpose that's like really crucial, and they're all like good cards to draw at different points. So yeah, I think another card I was talking to Gareth about was like Muktak, asking him his thoughts on that one. And I forget what I think his words were like, yeah, it just reads like a Yu-Gi-Oh card or something. Like it just looks dumb, which I think is fair. It is like, I think the other thing he said was that it's just like, it's like only good when you are, what was he saying? Like it's good when you're good already. I don't know. Like it's basically like kind of not win more, but it kind of is. Like I think my problem with Muktak is basically that like it's good when you already have your Evos. Like when you got your Evo train going, then it just adds to that. But like I prefer like Broodmother and Gigahorn Charger and these other cards because like it's not fair to compare Muktak to the early game stuff because it's just like a way worse early game card than like everything else. Like so you can't really compare it to that. Like I'd rather, if you want an early game card, I'd rather play like any 2-drop over Muktak. I'd rather play any of like the Turnip. Like that was my initial reasoning, which didn't really make sense. Is I was like, well, I cut Muktak because it's just like the worst 3-drop. Like Turnip's better, Hatchery's better, Sun Clan's better, or like I would just prefer more 2-drops to add to that count, basically. But it's not really fair to compare it to those cards because like you're basically, what you're really comparing Muktak to is like the other like kind of mid-game advantage cards, and that's like Gigahorn Charger, Broodmother, and stuff like that, where that's kind of more what you're looking at. And I think it's just worse because, again, like Muktak works when you already have your Evo train rolling. Like when you got an Anjac, you're already like in a golden position. Like you already got a lot good stuff going for you. You're going to maintain some other advantage going forward, or maybe you're getting it off Rollcore, but it's like you're already, if you're attacking with Rollcore and like chaining Rollcore and drawing like an evolution, and like it's one of those like kind of, it's not Like, it is kind of basically just kind of win more in a sense, in my opinion. Like, it definitely helps. Like, it's not win more because it is relevant. Like, you want some powerful card like that to push you over the top. But I think, like, I prefer Gigahorn Charger just because, like, Gigahorn Charger helps the games where you need to get, like, it gets you off the ground. Like, when you're trying to grind through your opponent who's, like, mesmerizing you and, like, Spire Puppeting you and trying to manage your creature and your board, like, Gigahorn Charger just, like, finds you that Anjac or finds you that Roll Core to start going. Whereas, like, Muktak only does anything when you're already going to some degree. So that's, like, the main difference that I have. And again, like, Muktak's just, like, so much worse of an early game card that if you're trying to justify it on those grounds, it loses to, like, basically everything else. And, yeah, I just, like, it's a nice hit-off roll core, but again, like, everything is, like, a good hit-off roll core to some extent. And I don't know. The one thing that I like about Muktak, it gives you that, like, kind of cohesion where it helps you, like, kind of piece together your Boulder Fist draws. Like, for the matchups, you need to, like, kind of wall up and sit back and, like, hit your inevitable kind of Boulder Fist at some point. Like, Muktak can be nice for that because you charge them early. It gives you access to them. But especially, like, if you have, like there could be situations where you have, like, a Boulder Fist and shields, and then you have a Boulder Fist that's, like, that you've already charged, or, like, two Boulder Fists you've already charged, or something ridiculous like that. And, like, Muktak can kind of tie everything together and give you access to that. But, I don't know. Like, I think Gigahorn Charger just searches your deck for Boulder Fist. Like, I just prefer it as a card, I think, overall. I think it just does more, just generates more advantage more reliably, basically. So, and I think that's kind of what Garrus, I forget his words, but they were, like, very succinct. Like, just, this card seems like it's good when you're already good, basically. I don't know. He said something dumb that was, like, kind of insightful, but I don't know. Whatever. But yeah, that was kind of, I mean, yeah, I think overall the list performed pretty well. I like the Horn Chameleons, and, like, they look pretty impressive, just, like, being one mana baits, and I don't know, everything functioned. Like, I do think, like, 3 Turnip might not be necessary. 3 Boulder Fist might not be necessary, but it is really helpful. So I don't know. I think if you go to second Gigahorn Charger, I think that might be an improvement over. That's basically my thoughts, and I think Gareth was kind of on board with when I suggested those changes, but yeah. I guess that kind of covers all the decks. Again, congrats to Gareth for just taking everything down, going the clean 4-0, spanking everybody with this nature deck. It was a pleasure to have everyone. Big thanks again to Stents as well for helping with the commentary. Big thanks to Andros as well for also helping with commentary. Both of them came on for multiple videos, so it's always a pleasure to have those guys help out with stuff. So big thanks to those two. Big thanks to everyone else for participating. Hopefully we can get some more people in the future. I know there's, like, a bunch of people who've been kind of talking about it and mentioning wanting to play, but this time around a lot of people were sort of busy, it felt like. So it was nice to do, like, the full round robin and get a taste for all the matchups, but it did go a little bit long. But yeah, overall, again, big thanks to everyone for playing. Thanks to everyone for following along and watching the tournament coverage as well. So if anyone has any, like, suggestions for things they would like to see in the future or anything along those lines, let me know. But as always, thank you guys for watching the videos, and we'll see you in the next ones. Bye.